outside of the previous session, over the course of the last 2 days, the science technology society nexus has come into play, and people have talked about how they recognize the different challenges that we face, both in terms of the material production and the ethical decisions that we have to make when we engage in climate robotics. And I not everybody's from the U.S., so I want to just make a funny point, maybe, is that in the United States, our political leaders use 100-year-old technology as a metaphor for regulating things like high tech, like AI and robotics, and that's railroads. We got to keep them these things on the rails. And so I think this is an outstanding opportunity for this group to lend its voice to this conversation globally, as we consider the ethical implications of this work. So I want to introduce each of the panel members. I can't see if they're here yet, but I'm going to, unless otherwise told, assuming that they are. But first we have Barbara Glover, who's the African Union High-Level Panel on the African Union High-Level Panel on Emerging Technologies. Claudia Ortiz, the United Nations Development Program. Dr. Sabrina Cipullo, the managing director at the Solar Impulse Foundation. Minna Shukri, who's a senior consultant at Nordic Sustainability. And finally, Professor Yunus Telliel, who's my colleague at Worcester Polytechnic Institute in the United States. So I'll please note that the contact information and LinkedIn information is available in the chat right now. If you have questions, please feel free to pop those in. And I guess what I'd like to do is we'll start with Barbara. I'd like to call upon you to sort of give a brief introduction to yourself and talk a bit about your work.
Thank you very much, Robert. My name is Barbara Glover. I work on the Secretariat of the African Union High-Level Panel on Emerging Technologies. This is a high-level panel that was set up by the heads of state and governments sometime in 2016, and their work is to provide recommendations to the African Union leadership on innovation and emerging technologies worth harnessing. We have also been working on the release of several technical reports towards advisory support to policymakers and decision makers. So, for instance, we have reports on blockchain for e-governance, artificial intelligence for socioeconomic development, gene drives for malaria elimination, drones for precision agriculture, among many others. We also are we recently released a white paper on a continental strategy for artificial intelligence, looking at what we should be prioritizing as a continent, having an understanding of our unique perspectives to AI and the impact it can have on our systems. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you for adding me to this discussion.
Thank you, Barbara. Next, Claudia.
Yeah, thank you very much, Robert and Patrick and everybody who organized this summit. Thank you for having me. My name is Claudia. I work in the United Nations Development Program Climate Hub. The Climate Hub is essentially a global team of practitioners all around the world in every region that supports countries not only in developing their national determined contribution, which are basically the plans and their commitments to the Paris Agreement in terms of mitigation and adaptation, but also take those to life and actually be able to ramp up implementation of projects and programs that can then help achieve these targets. And how do we go about also monitoring these projects and programs? We work at the local level, at the regional level, and at the global level. I myself have been involved in designing projects with local communities in different countries in Latin America and also in Central Asia and Asia Pacific. And now sitting at UNDP headquarters, we have more of a sort of global perspective on the global policy and the negotiations and what is going to actually make and strengthen the Paris Agreement. And I would say that just maybe to start the conversation, that one thing that I've noticed at the local and global sides of the coin when it comes to climate issues is that we tend to look at things as individual parts. You know, we focus either on the health of the oceans or the temperature increase, but in reality, what we're looking at is much more of a complex ecological crisis. And I think that right now, the Paris Agreement and the climate community is at a very ripe moment to start making, you know, joining these dots and not looking only at carbon emissions, but also how biodynamics are related in all of this. And so, you know, with that, maybe I'll leave it at that for now, but very happy to be here and thanks for having me.
Thank you. Sabrina.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sabrina, one of the managing director at the Solar Impulse Foundation. I think our work is quite linked to the one of Claudia. We are also working on building a world alliance for efficient solutions. So bringing together not only the technology, but also all the actors around, whether they are governments, adopters, so they can be public or private, experts. So our role is really around the technology. Our mission stemmed from the Solar Impulse flight, which some of you may be familiar with. It was an amazing adventure around the world where Bertrand Piccard flew with a solar plane, proving that clean tech exists today. So that was a bit our flagship mission. And since then, we've been focusing on collecting climate tech around the world. So we have built a portfolio of clean technology that is freely accessible for everyone on our platform. I will be sharing it in the link. And of course, we work around the adoption because our key goal is to boost the adoption of these clean technologies. So I thought it was interesting to respond to one of the questions, but then I guess we'll go into it in detail more later. It's, can the robotic really amplify the effort around climate change? And I've been quite pleased to say that while looking through our database, I found a good match between our label solution and the global map of climate robotics. So what we also do, we certify solution through the efficient solution label. The aim to really shine a light on this technology that exists today, and they're clean and profitable. So I think when we talk about robotics, sometime in the mind of people, there's a sort of a hesitation. Is this science fiction or is this really something tangible? So we have example of plenty of technology that today are there to help go further in the climate change and tackle real problem. And I'm happy to share more details in the link and go forward with the conversation.
Thank you. Minna.
Yes, thank you, Robert, and thank you, Patrick, also for inviting me today. I'm very grateful for being here. So I come from Nordic Sustainability and I work as a senior consultant. So I think in contrary to what the others here have been saying, I'm working a lot with companies directly to support them in this shift from a traditional production company or a traditional financial sector into pushing them towards a more sustainable company in line with the Paris Agreement. So that's kind of our goal. Nordic Sustainability is very much a strategy consultancy house, a sustainability strategy consultancy house, and we work within climate, finance, all of the EU policies that we're seeing coming in now. So very much from a European perspective, and how this regulatory push will transform companies. With that said, though, we work quite a lot also with understanding now that all resources are finite, and we're working within a framework called the planetary boundaries, trying to respect this holistic view when we look at the climate crisis, not only being from a CO2 perspective. Yeah. I think one of the main points that I brought with me today is that I would also like to focus a bit on some of the opportunities that the robotics ecosystem industry can have when we look at it from the European perspective of having this push of regulations. So not only looking at the downside of what we have in the world right now, but how can we use this as an opportunity, and how can we switch and transform for the future in respect with the boundaries of the planet. Thank you. Thank
you. And Professor Telliel.
Hi,
Yunus.
everyone. Thanks, Rob. It's very exciting to be here. I'm an assistant professor of anthropology, so I'm, approaching to this question through the lens of humanistic social sciences. At WPI, at Worcester Polytechnic Institute, I work with Rob Krueger, and my other colleague, Berk Charlie, is also online. I'm the social science lead of a research traineeship program on robots and future of work. It's a program that has been funded by United States National Science Foundation. It's a federal agency supporting scientific work in academic institutions. I teach applied ethics courses for robotics engineering graduate students, as well as I advise engineering faculty and students on the broader impacts of their robotics projects. I help as a social scientist. I establish. I bring kind of a fieldwork perspective. I build user studies and ethical assessment tools to help like my engineering colleagues so that they build better robots for all of us. A portion of my research focuses on what my colleagues and I call public interest robotics. This is an area that combines, I think, like what this panel tries to accomplish. It brings an applied ethics and critical policy perspective to research and development in robotics. I believe this is like hugely needed. Private investment and interest, have brought a huge spotlight on robotics, but it also become its challenge. And I think some of the panels like highlighted that. So I think a public interest perspective in robotics will help to lead the way to perhaps better position robotics research for the coming decade. Great to be here.
Thank you, Yunus. And thanks everyone else for your comments. And I think, I'm just looking at the diverse group of people that we have on this panel and the previous panel as well. And I'm wondering, can we really reconcile the ethics of bringing together a more socially just robotics in the context of something that is beyond social entrepreneurship, beyond the public interest as one public's version of public versus another public's version, and get beyond this as we've seen it in robotics and I've seen it in sub-Saharan Africa, where it's really an extractive industry. Are there ways that we can think about that can help spread those benefits, learn from the expertise, be driven by the needs of folks living in the global majority regions? Yes, please. Claudia.
I was trying to find the raise my hand icon. I couldn't. But anyway, yeah, I mean, if you don't mind, I can take the floor. And thank you so much for the question. I think, I mean, you hit the nail right in the head. We have to keep a couple things in mind as we go about deploying these technologies. And this is all based on a lot of the experience that we have in UNDP, as I said, in designing and implementing projects on the ground. So the first thing is social safeguards and ensuring that these solutions really just keep, a human rights approach. A lot of what we do, for example, in terms of the adaptation portfolio is ecosystem-based adaptation. And that concept, if you look at it from the most conceptual, basic way, and the meaning of it is to take into account and bring back ancestral knowledge and indigenous knowledge in those approaches where you're going to be able to bring back ecosystems to then be able to add resilience to climate change in a certain community or in a certain landscape. And some of those things cannot really be replaced by AI. As I think I mentioned in the beginning, if we probably need more EI than AI, right? We need more of the ecological intelligence. And a lot of this ecological intelligence and understanding the interconnectedness of organisms and how one impacts the other and it impacts us as humans is actually, a lot of it is contained in these indigenous communities and local communities. So a lot of the work that we do is ensuring that they have not only a say in the process, but that they actually co-create the solutions. So as long as we keep that principle in mind, I think we are in a good path forward. The other one is, in terms of the extraction, is the material footprint of these technologies. So if you think about, everything from the very beginning, the sourcing of the material that then you will need to produce robotics, right? Think about the lithium batteries. We were just convened a panel actually in UNDP last week with Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia that is known as the lithium triangle, that brought together not only UNDP, but also the governments and the industry leaders and the indigenous communities to say, okay, hold on a second. I mean, there is a rampant need now, triple renewables, triple e-mobility, particularly in the global north. How do we ensure that these areas in the global south that are rich in lithium, copper, cobalt, you name it, are not going to become the sacrifice zones for this, renewable energy targets in the global north? So that has to absolutely be taken into account, and I think standards need to be defined to make sure that we're not creating another problem, to trying to solve a problem by creating another problem. And the other 2 points in that same chain are the production of the technologies. How much do you ensure that you're also reducing greenhouse gas emission in the production, and then the disposal. These technologies reach a lifetime, and then what's going to happen to that? So I think those questions definitely need to be defined, and this is probably the community to do that before we think of things such as scale. Because, for example, we were hearing in the previous session about shipping things from China. I mean, think about the ecological footprint of that, right? And so if we are thinking about scaling up the technology without looking at the fact that it's going to solve only one symptom and not really addressing the whole problem, which is the ecological crisis, then we're losing the battle. So those 2 principles to keep in mind for now. Thank you.
I think you might be on mute, Rob.
Thank you. Barbara, it's your turn.
Thank you. I just wanted to build up on the last speaker's excellent remarks. So at the African Union level, the African Union Commission on Human Rights released a resolution. We call it Resolution 473, looking at emerging technologies like AI, robotics, and the need for it to protect human rights. And so that's, as we are looking at ethical considerations, we need to also look at the impact of some of these technologies when it comes to issues around human rights. We need particularly to look at cultural sensitivity, even in the design of some of these robotics for their deployments. We need to ensure that we understand the area in which this is being deployed. I think a good case in point is the engagement of Kenyan farmers when there was a development of water management robotic tools. You need to have the local community as part of the design process, and that's usually the danger when these technologies are imported out of from Western parts, because you have them designed for certain terrains and certain cultural settings or adaptability to emerging technologies that perhaps local communities may not really be accustomed to. So it's important that we look at that. And then also there's a need for national policies. If you have drones flying over, we have privacy concerns as well, data safeguarding concerns as well. And so there's need for national policies that speak to some of these. This we have tried to address in some of our continental strategies, which we then hope to adapt nationally when we have some of these discussions around AI and robotics. I also wanted to touch on the need for governance of ongoing work in some of these communities. So you have private sector that is heavily involved, mostly more interested, but we also need to involve the local and national authorities, align it to some of the national development priorities, in those communities to ensure that we don't just have haphazard, excited scientific projects going on all over the place, but you have activities that are addressing local community needs and are aligned to some of the policies that are on ground. It helps also with sustaining the initiative long beyond when maybe a partnership or an investment by private sector has ended, and then it also sustains ownership and guards some of the responsibilities that needs to be assigned to the outcomes of these technologies on the continent. So I just thought I'll touch base and include some of these ethical and political concerns as well, whilst we are thinking around climate robotics in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Would anybody else like to comment on that? Oh, Yunus.
Oh, sorry.
So, did I see a hand?
Oh, I can't wait. Minna,
Oh,
you should
sorry.
go.
Sorry, I can't find the raising my hand.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm just gonna try to go ahead. Thank you, Yunus. So I think while you guys were talking, and it was very insightful for me to listen, I was thinking, because a lot of, at least some of the concerns that we're seeing is the draw from the global north on renewable energy or renewable sources and material consumption and so on. And now we're seeing the European Green Deal being rolled out, right? We're seeing the Circular Economy Action Plan. And from this, we're seeing how they're going to, at least they're trying to address critical raw materials, right to repair. How can we ensure that circular economy under the Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive is being attacked, combined with that they're moving the whole financial sector to kind of make a shift from the capitalism that we're seeing today, right? To think differently. My question is then, with this happening, how can we then ensure that we are addressing some of these topics, Claudia, that you were stating here, right, regarding social labor or manual labor, especially in the local communities around these extraction sites, and especially in terms of indigenous people, because they are all addressed in the new policies coming out. But how do we ensure that when that is rolled out to member states, that these policies will be enforced enough, also in terms of what you said in the beginning, Robert, in terms of that we need to reconcile on something. Do we need to do that? Are we going to manage to do that? We're definitely not going to manage to do that today in 30 minutes, but how are we going to ensure and reinforce that these policies can actually support the push in the right direction? So I think that's some of my concerns and hot topic, if you can say so.
Thank you very much. That excellent commentary from everyone. Thank you. Yunus.
Yeah, I think I was going to highlight the point about the scales. I think one of the things that will matter with climate robotics is the scale. A lot of people, I think, are aware of one scale in which a particular robotics technology is working on. But I think the points about the using which metals to use to build a robot is also part of a concern for perhaps an engineering project. So, and I think also thinking about maybe smaller drones that might be appealing to address certain things, then which eventually could also create a lot of environmental problems in terms of recycling or getting rid of. So I think seeing these technologies from a life cycle perspective and thinking about how different things come together, from labor to critical parts, as well as knowledge, and then kind of how these are operating in which institutional and social spaces, and then thinking about how do we how do we get rid of them? How do we repair them? So I think there are so many places where we can actually intervene to make things right, and I think that requires an awareness of the multiple scales that robotics is operating and will be operating at. And I think I think here my colleagues here, I think they work in organizations that actually operate in these multiple scales. And I think bringing that to technology, bringing that awareness of interscalar kind of work to technology, startups or initiatives, I think would be crucial.
Thank you, Yunus. So we've been given an extra few minutes. Thank you, Patrick. I don't see any questions in the, oh, here we go. Have any climate robotics companies startups carried out life cycle assessments?
So maybe I can respond to that. So life cycle assessment can be quite costly, as you know, for startups, but there are some other elements that could be really helpful to establish what's the impact of these solutions. Through the certification that we offer, we help innovator doing a LCA-like analysis. So for sure, the reflection around the element of what is the raw material used, what is the footprint when you build a robotic solution, what is the deployment, the use, and the disposal phase are definitely taken into account by these innovators. But for sure, more work is to be done to really democratize the life cycle assessment for robotic solution and also make it more accessible for these innovators in terms of cost. I think that's a bit my answer in that sense. And maybe if we want to wrap it up, what we said before, I think there should really, I was taking some notes and I think we all touch upon a similar point. So there should be, from my point of view, also a promotion in R&D. So really government and institutions should prioritize funding for R&D in climate robotics to really make sure that this technology can advance even further and be implemented. And linked to that, there should really be more subsidies for adoption. So financial incentive and subsidies that can accelerate the deployment of robotic solutions in critical sectors such as agriculture. I'm thinking about energy, waste management. I really think that having more incentive could really help offset the initial cost that sometimes may be high when we talk about implementing these systems. So that would help making it more accessible for smaller operators or less developed region. And some of you mentioned before the need for standards that can cover data security, privacy, safety, and ensure that the deployment of this solution doesn't really lead to social inequity, but more actually to social equity. And I think also Barbara mentioned it's important to engage with the local communities in the design and the implementation. So when we come with a robotic solution, then make sure that those are adapted to the local context and to the specific need and conditions of the area that will be used. So I like to say often that a solution is not inherently bad or good, but it really depends on the context that we want to use it and apply it. And so to close it up, I think one point that you all mentioned is really to make sure that there's a sustainable and responsible innovation. So also looking everything around the life cycle and the impact of this technology, not only at the production stage, but really through the life cycle entirely. So really focusing also on the disposal stage that is often neglected in these realities.
Thank you. I think that raises some significant points. And when we talk about indigenous communities and things like that, and having, as Yunus points out, self-determination, and Claudia points out about ownership of these things, I'm reminded of a quote that I read in a book on Southern theory, and it's about, it says basically the global majority has experienced climate change before we in the global north knew what was going on. And it's sort of at the forefront of these issues, and sort of we see it as temperatures and things like that, but there's lots of other concerns around livelihoods and gender relations that could impact these things. And I think that it's important that we stay true to our word and really engage people, so we make sure that that the climate robotics solves real problems for these communities.
Maybe
Yes.
I can add a little bit also. I'm joined here by some colleagues in UNDP, and actually Nina Kancheva, who just wrote in the chat, she's our indigenous peoples expert and a big advocate of the use of drone actually to be able to then protect these territories against deforestation, against oil drilling and things like that have been quite successful. And so I just wanted to highlight that I think a lot of it is depending on the context, and again, is having the protocols in place and the right forms of doing the consultations, because it's not just with indigenous communities, it can be youth, it can be local people, whatever it is, but ensuring that technology serves the community and not the opposite. I think that is one key message I wanted to say. And yes, we have some resources that we're sharing here in the chat and would love to take on, bilateral conversations with some of you if you're interested. So thank you for that.
Thank you. So in the interest of time, does anyone have a final closing thought, or shall I just go down the list? And Barbara, is there anything that you would like to say in closing for this session?
Yes, thank you very much. Just to add onto the previous comments, emphasizing the need for cooperation between governments and the private sector in rolling out these robotic options. And the African Union's doors are always open to some of these collaborations or facilitation of engagements with governments and other local authorities if developers seek that through the work of the high-level panel on emerging technologies. I would leave my email in the chat section, and you're welcome to engage for us to take some of these discussions forward.
Thank you, Barbara. Claudia, would you like to say a final comment?
Yeah, maybe just my hot take. I think the colleagues, we need to intervene less, not more. I think that if we start stepping back, we'll see that nature has all the inherent technologies that it needs to be able to regenerate and be able to, gain back the planetary health that we need. So I would keep that principle in mind. And I also recommend a wonderful book called Less is More, and I will put the link in the chat. That has nothing to do with UNDP or with me, but I think it's an excellent source to put this practice, to put this theory to practice. Thank you.
Thank you. Sabrina.
I think for me, it's really around the network and making sure that any technology stems for a need and it's co-created. So it comes from really a collaboration on the ground and with the people that are in the needs for it.
Did you say my name, Robert? Yeah, just
Yes, I did. Sorry.
Perfect. Yeah, I thought I saw that in your mouth movement there. So I think I'm going to continue adding from Sabrina there, because I think that leads on to what I have noted down. So I think for me, it starts all the way in the beginning, thinking about what is purposeful. Whenever we start to think about developing and working with the robotics, does this create any purposes and any value on a broader scale? Will this be purposeful, not only for maybe the community you are thinking about where this should be developed and implemented, but also just for, like, we're talking about like affected communities around these different sites in the value chain. Then I think it's very important to think about trade-offs. There are so many different trade-offs that we are forgetting when we're looking at a climate-focused perspective. We touched upon some of them today, right, with the social aspects of sustainability. We have multiple under environmental negative impacts, biodiversity loss, pollution, water toxicity, and so on. Yeah, and then just, I think if you then decide to move on, think about circularity, do those light LCAs in the beginning, think about circularity, how can we incorporate that, and just be transparent from the very beginning in the totality of your value chain.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for coming and spending this time with us. Yunus.
Yeah, I think each technology comes with a set of lenses, and robotics and AI, I think that it's the same. And I guess my question is what I put on the chat. Do we want to see climate change through the lens of robots, or we want to see robots through the lens of climate change? And I think that really matters for, you know, what comes next.
Thank you, Yunus. Bikash, you have a question, and then I'll turn it back over to Patrick.
I just wanted to highlight that, because there are discussion on climate change, so there are like global properties like Mount Everest, which are like, where there are glacier meltings and Sherpas, these people doesn't want to live there. So I think, for us discussing on climate robotics, it's really important because climate robotics is something that makes this global property a habitable place. So I think it's always important to stay together for this kind of solutions.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. And I want to thank the panelists. It was a wonderful session. I agree. We need, somebody said an hour. I think an hour and a half would be better, where we could, sit around and 10-minute talk for a few minutes and then kick around ideas and come up with something that encapsulates the discussion. But I will now turn it back over to Patrick to close out the session. So thank you.